Welcome to Climate Change and Health in Small Island Developing States, focused on the Caribbean. If you require translation into Spanish or French, please use the link posted in the chat and choose your desired language at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You should continue to keep this browser open as well to utilize the chat and Q&A features. Please be sure to scroll down and mute the video. Please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions for the panelists. This session is being recorded. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Viola Nicholas, and I'm really thrilled to be your moderator this evening for this special discussion on the potential of public-private partnership for climate and health action. I work at the University of the West Indies, Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business, as the Director of Marketing and Consulting. But I'm also passionate about the role of civil society as the third partner in the operation of a country alongside private and public sector, which is why I volunteer as an associate at EarthMedic. In today's discussion, the potential of private-public partnership for climate and health action, it's particularly important because we realize that the fight against climate change cannot be for civil society alone. While climate change may be classified as a social cause, it affects health, and of course, it's very difficult for businesses to operate without the availability of a healthy workforce. Beyond that, the impact of climate change on health directly affects the profitability of business. And in today's session, we have representatives from a number of industries to share their experiences and their perspectives. The truth is that if you speak to a CEO, a managing director, or a business owner in the Caribbean and ask about their company's measures against climate change, you'd get a mixed picture, with measures mainly focusing on short-term cost savings. There may not be an understanding of climate risks, and few companies would have a governance and steering mechanism in place to develop and implement comprehensive climate strategies. So that's why we're here. In today's strategy, we're really hoping that we're able to convey the critical need for the private sector in multi-sectoral action to address climate change and health, build communication and relationship between sectors, and begin to explore options for public, private, people, planet partnerships. That's a lot of P's in there. We're looking to present opportunities to the private and public sectors for engagement and stimulate engagement of the private sector in diverse ways. And these include implementation of funding, sharing of data, and joint action projects. So today we have an absolutely fantastic panel for you from across the Caribbean. And we're going to kick things off with Ravi Tiwari. Ravi is the Guardian Group Chief Executive Officer, and he will be speaking on the topic of ensuring risk in the context of climate change. Now, Ravi is the Group CEO of Guardian Group, one of the largest financial service organizations that operates across the English and Dutch Caribbean. An actuary by profession, he has 25 years of experience in the insurance industry. He began his career in actuarial consulting and worked for several insurance clients throughout the Caribbean. On joining Guardian in 1999, he worked as a valuation actuary, where he played a pivotal role in several key acquisition projects that drove the rapid expansion of Guardian Group. In 2005, he was appointed as president of Guardian Life of the Caribbean. In 2011, as head of the lifeline of business for the group, and in 2014, he was appointed the group CEO of Guardian Group. Mr. Tiwari holds directorships on the Guardian Holdings Board, Guardian Life of the Caribbean, and other group subsidiary boards, the Advanced Cardiovascular Institute, and the Trinidad and Tobago Citizens Alliance Against Crime. The second person on our panel here this afternoon would be Gabriel Farry. Gabriel is the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and he will be speaking on the role of regional business community in addressing the climate crisis. Gabriel has over 40 years of leadership experience in various companies and industries, both locally, regionally, in North America, and the Far East. He has come up through the ranks and held senior executive roles at Carib Brewery Limited, Guardian Media Limited, Angostura Holdings Limited, SM Jalil and Company Limited, Massey Group, and T. Geddes Grant Limited, in addition to serving on numerous boards. He's currently the CEO of Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. His experience in manufacturing and distribution across the region provides a solid base to support the advocacy needs of the regional business community. He holds an MBA in International Business and is a member of Delta Mu Delta International Honor Society of Business Administration, having graduated in the top 10% of his class. And after Gabriel, we have a video presentation by Joanne O'Brien. Joanne is the Vice President of Digital Ecosystems in TM Forum, and her video will be on the topic of supporting climate and health action with digital partnerships. Joanne currently leads the Beyond Connectivity initiative at TM Forum, helping her members to develop their diversification strategy to grow their business beyond connectivity. She is a transformative technology leader who has led the development of two of the most successful areas of TM Forum, open APIs and the business architecture. Joanne is a proven technology leader with over 25 years industry experience, initially in consumer electronics and subsequently in telecommunications, working at both network and OSS BSS architectural layers. Joanne is TM Forum's representative on global industry organizations, leading the eHealth pandemic-focused initiative, and represents TM Forum on Next Generation IoT, an advisory board to the European Union. Joanne also leads TM Forum's representative for the 5G Enabled Manufacturing Project, a consortium led by Ford Motor Car and Vodafone. Joanne graduated with first-class honors, BSc in Information Technology, majoring in telecommunications from Dublin City University, and an MBA from Open University. And rounding out this amazing panel, we have Nicola Madden-Gregg. She is the first Vice President of Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and her presentation will be on role of the hotel and tourism sector in engaging diverse audiences in climate action. With over 25 years experience in the hospitality business, Mrs. Madden-Gregg has worked in various subsectors of the industry, including cruise lines, attractions, and hotels. She has held various management positions and is currently Group Director of Marketing and Sales for the Courtly Hospitality Group, which properties include the Courtly Hotel and Suites, the Knutsford Court Hotel, the Courtly Corporate Center, the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, and the Holiday Inn Resort Montego Bay. She has been actively engaged in leadership roles in the tourism industry, currently serving as the first Vice President of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, where she also chairs their Government Affairs and Advocacy Committee. A past president of the Jamaica Hotel and Tourism Association, Mrs. Madden-Gregg presently sits on the board of the Jamaica Tourist Board. Sits on the boards of the Jamaica Tourist Board, the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, as well as the Tourism Linkages Council, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Alpha Academy High School Board, and is current chair of the Gastronomy Tourism Network. As a member of the Jamaica Tourism COVID-19 Recovery Task Force and in her role with the, I believe it is the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, she has played an active role in helping to guide tourism's recovery efforts regionally and in Jamaica. So let's kick things off as we invite Mr. Ravi Tiwari to do his presentation on ensuring risk in the context of climate change.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to spend some time interacting with you. My talk is about the interrelationship between climate change and the insurance sector. I'm going to deliberately focus my attention on the impact on the health insurance sector, because I think the impact on the property insurance sector is a bit more obvious. It's in your face. Global climate change causes more frequent and more severe hurricanes, and they can devastate economies, causing tremendous damage to property and all sorts of infrastructure. Those same hurricanes, though, they also have a severe consequence on people's health. They cause injuries, they disrupt health facilities, they pollute water and cause waterborne diseases, and they can have an impact on the food supply and cause malnutrition and all the related illnesses. But there's a much more subtle effect of climate change on health, and it often goes unnoticed, but it is even more significant, I believe, than the direct impact of catastrophic hurricanes on our society. And it manifests in many ways. Because obviously climate change causes global warming and higher air temperature. Now, that has a correlation with cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. To exacerbate matters, the high global temperatures affect the ozone, and this really just heightens the problem. In addition, higher air temperatures promotes more pollen, which triggers asthma and, again, respiratory diseases. But it's not only the higher temperature impact of climate change that has an impact on health. It also is due to the increased frequency and severity of concentrated rainfall, which causes a reemergence of waterborne diseases, and also causes some diseases that we thought we dealt with years ago to start to rear their heads again, malaria, cholera, and the like. So the impact of climate change on health is quite significant. Now, the median estimates, and this is only median, and this is quite conservative, 250,000 additional global deaths per annum between 2030 and 2050 due to climate change. Okay, and the direct costs of these deaths are estimated to be $2 to $4 billion a year from 2030. And that's only the direct costs. I'll speak more about the indirect effect a little later on. Now, that's obviously bad for the insurance sector, okay, because we have more claims. But the point I want to make is that at best, only 30% of the population in the Caribbean are insured. So there's a heavy burden. 70% of the costs are borne by the general public through higher taxes, through the state. And even the 30% are covered, you're going to find over time, potentially less and less being covered, because health insurance is going to get more expensive as global warming causes increase in claims. So those are the direct effects. But there's also a creeping indirect effect that is much more, potentially much more even devastating than that. It's not only, I spoke about deaths, but as the mystery novel says, death comes at the end, okay? There's also the impact of a diminution in the health and quality of life caused by climate change. And this has an economic effect. It has an effect on the physical work capacity of our population. It also has an impact on quality of life. And then there's the indirect things that have an impact on health. The destruction of coasts, the destruction of our economy, for instance, the destruction of reefs and the tourism infrastructure, increases stress levels. It has an indirect impact on health. Global warming creates less arable land. It creates lower yields on crops. Again, an impact on malnutrition and indirect impact on health. In total, it is estimated that if global temperatures rise by 2%, and they're likely to rise by more than that, but if they rise by 2% to 2050, the impact will be a 10.8% diminution in the GDP of the Caribbean region. So it's severe. And the point I want to make is that this is not a problem for the health sector. This is a problem for every sector of our society. So we can't talk about a solution that is one-dimensional, that we can't talk about the health sector solving the health impacts of climate change. We have to talk about a cohesive collective solution to the wider problem. So I want to go into what can the financial services industry bring to the table and add to this cohesive solution? Well, it's two things in summary. First is capital, and the second is data. So let me talk about capital. The financial services industry We are the custodians of the regional savings, in particular the custodians of long-term savings. And it is obvious, but it's a point that's often missed, that the greatest good and the greatest goal for long-term savings is achieved when that long-term savings is invested in a way that promotes a growth in the economy. Because what's the point in saving in products for retirement, for pensions, if you do not have a sustainable, viable economy and sustainable, viable nations at the point in time when people retire? So savings has to be directed into these activities. And I put to you that it is a fallacy that you cannot achieve commercial benefit and societal benefit at the same time. Of course you can. Of course you can have win-wins. Of course we can direct those savings into ventures that combat climate change, while at the same time discharging a fiduciary responsibility to earn a decent rate of return on people's savings that we're the custodians of. Of course you can. I'll give you some examples. First, in the Southern Caribbean, Trinidad is a hydrocarbon-based economy, very reliant on natural gas, limited supply. But there's a future that is much more carbon friendly. That industry and investments could be directed to turning that into a hydrogen-based economy rather than a natural gas-based economy. The investments can be directed into renewable power, into ecotourism, into eco-friendly businesses. So these are all win-wins. And the greatest obstacle to this that we need to address as a society is the regulatory restrictions on this. Simple, basic things. How could institutional capital be allocated? And how, even at a personal level, can we connect solar to the grid? Can we resell power to the grid? How do you get license for going off grid? All of those things need to be addressed. On the data side, financial services industries are the custodians of tremendous amounts of data that can be brought to bear to solve this problem. We also have access to reinsurers whose job it is to create research so they could better predict the future. Financial services firms have also invested heavily in data science capabilities that could be brought to bear as we work towards a cohesive solution. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave you on the point that the impact of climate change on health is huge. And it is a societal problem that we could only solve cohesively. And I believe financial services has a great role to play in how we collectively address that problem. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ravi, for that great presentation. I'd like now to invite Gabriel Faria, Chief Executive Officer of Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, to deliver his presentation on the role of the regional business community in addressing the climate crisis.
Thank you very much, Viola. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this session. I must tell you that in my engagement with James Hospitalis earlier, quite some time ago, when we looked at climate change and health, the reality is that today we are at a crucial pivot point to really create a step change in CARICOM, to commit to doing what's required to reduce climate change and really shift towards a lower carbon, more inclusive society. But there needs to be a new method of human politics. I think COVID has created an environment where we understand that something that happened in China is going to happen in St. Vincent. It's going to be so we're so connected. And many times people think of climate change as abstract. How does this impact me? And the reality is that we are all impacted. Ravi gave an example in health. I know from an insurance perspective, Ravi may not say that, but I know from an insurance perspective, when there's a hurricane in St. Martin, I know that private sector organizations in Trinidad are going to end up paying higher insurance coverage, because the reality is that that's the concept of insurance. You know, throughout the Caribbean, when we look at what's being done, I think some governments have done more than others, but the reality is the majority of governments have not done what's required to engage the wider business community in partnering to address this issue. As far as I know, there is no CARICOM framework in the region to evaluate the status of private sector adoption or adaptation and strategies to make it more effective. Interestingly, of all the countries in the region, I believe Trinidad, because of its advanced industrial and commercial infrastructure, it actually amplifies our comparative weakness against other CARICOM countries as we look at the NDC scorecards across the region. In 2012, the Trinidad and Tobago government published the Sustainable Development White Paper, June. In April 2017, the Ministry of Planning launched the Sustainable Development Goals Mainstreaming and the acceleration policy to link it to the country's vision in 2030. In 2018, the Ministry of Planning noted that Trinidad and Tobago's transition to a more environmentally conscious society in keeping with the terms of the Paris Agreement on climate change was going to cost roughly $2 billion US. And there was a signatory, I remember viewing the session and the persons from the United Nations were there. You know, governments do an excellent job in consultation. And I actually decided to look up what consultation was. I've been invited to so many of them and nothing's come out of them. I wanted to find out what they are. And it's really the action of formally consulting or discussing, but there's no further obligation, unfortunately. And of course, governments, not just ours probably have more expertise than others, are amazingly competent at setting up task force to provide reports. However, the part where we all fail, and private sector to an extent, I believe less so, is the execution aspect. That's where the gap is. We see it every year in our national budget. I think we, as citizens on these rocks in the Caribbean, need to recognize that with the continued lack of official coordinated strategy for low carbon development with projects and initiatives among public, private, and civil society sectors, it really creates an unwillingness, a lack of motivation. And I will tell you, from a private sector perspective, I learned more in the last week trying to do some research to understand this topic even more. So ignorance. The government has to provide the framework, the impetus, the current regulatory environment sometimes, and the incentive environment. So, you know, I was talking to James in a session earlier, and we talked about the cost of taking solar for your home. The payback in Trinidad is 7 years. But the government continues to talk about energy conservation. And it would be so simple if there was really a desire to change the predictable outcome in our national budget. You will put an incentive in place for people who invest in solar energy for their homes. Because at 7 years, it's very difficult for most people to make that choice. I think that really is, in my mind, the linking. I can tell you now that there are private sector-led initiatives, and they're practiced more so with larger local companies, and of course the multinationals. The energy sector is doing a lot in that area, because they're following their global directives. And a few businesses have actually developed detailed assessments of their current and potential impact of climate change on their businesses, or how their businesses will impact climate change, and they're taking corrective actions. However, for them to be implemented, we really need to deal with those economic and regulatory barriers that actually, you know, I use the word discourage, but in many instances, it prevents implementing measures. And a simple thing like in Trinidad, we talk about conserve energy. People have been trying to put in their own energy infrastructure, but you're not able to put energy back to the grid. It's interesting, in Trinidad, if you decide to drill your own well, WASA doesn't allow you to use your own well water. You have to go through hoops. So these things are some of the challenges we need to recognize, and governments need to recognize that they have to lead in this model. Recently, Trinidad and Tobago is launched, so it's involved in a hydrogen strategy. And I think that could really lead to revitalization of petrochemical industries at the Point Lisa estate. The strategy was actually first articulated in July, I believe, and really as a means of reducing carbon emissions and transition to renewable energy. So again, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, it's the start, right? So that's climate change. That's the impact on our people, on our businesses, and we need to understand that we have to take a proactive position. I want to talk a little bit about that very quickly. I have been fortunate to work with so many companies who have taken proactive actions in reformulating their products to reduce sugar. So beverage companies and so on. But again, this is private sector led rather than collaborative. So what we have to do is recognize, rather than holding a stick on the private sector, let's work collaboratively. Let's set some benchmarks and milestones, and let's measure where we want to be. 2030 is around the corner. If we don't take proactive action now, we're not going to leave a healthy planet and healthy citizens. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Gabriel. That had, really a call for action with us here. I just want to say as well, just to remind you that if you have any questions, please send the questions into the Q&A chat. It will be filtered to the panelists, and we will be taking Q&A at the end. At this point in time, I'd like to play a video. We will be playing a video from Joanne O'Brien. It's a pre-recorded video, and it will be on supporting climate and health action with digital partnerships for the needed speed and scale.
Hello, my name is Joanne O'Brien. I'm the Vice President of Digital Ecosystems at TM Forum, and I'm delighted to join you today. TM Forum is a not-for-profit industry association, and we bring together telecommunications service providers and all of their suppliers around the globe. Over the last 30 years, we've been developing the industry best practices and standards to enable interoperability, scalability, of the telecommunications operations management systems and beyond. My role as VP of Digital Ecosystems is to look at the boundary between technology, telecommunications, from the telecommunications service providers and into the industry verticals, such as digital health and manufacturing in cities. We've done a huge amount of work in the digital health space. You may or may not be aware, but many communication service providers around the globe are working locally with their governments and their health ecosystems in their regions on digital health transformation. So, for example, in the UK, BT, across Europe, Orange, Middle East, STC, in Asia, Telia and TELUS, and in Australia, Telstra. Of course, in the US, it's also similar, AT&T and Verizon. So telecommunication service providers not only provide the connectivity that is needed for digital health, it's also bringing the infrastructure, skills and expertise to design a digital health transformation that is scalable, interoperable, will enable solutions to be portable to different regions. In doing so, solutions that you develop in one region can be imported to other regions, and it is the underlying standards of TM Forum that enable that. So we develop, like mentioned, many of the standards to enable connectivity and interoperability. We also develop what we call open APIs and data models, and these are designed to be what we call service agnostic, meaning they can be applied to healthcare, smart cities and manufacturing. They're the common core that can then be extended for a given context, such as a health context. We have proved these out in many different scenarios and situations, and by using these common standards, you inherit the benefits of 30 years of expertise in Team Forum, and it's all freely available on our website. Any developers, any architects can take these APIs. You don't even need to be a member of Team Forum. However, you're welcome to join us. We would obviously always welcome new members to join us. One of the areas where it would make sense for us to collaborate is really in what we call catalyst projects. These are rapid concept, proof of concept projects where we explore a very particular challenge and then look to solve that challenge. But we embed in all of the solutions that we design as with our members with the standards of Team Forum, meaning that they will be scalable and interoperable. So, for example, you do hear a lot, or at least I have heard many times from our digital health interactions, is that the industry is suffering very much from pilotitis. And in order to get away from that or move beyond that, requires the types of standards that we talk about at Team Forum, which is standards around process, information, architecture, APIs, etc. It is this library of assets that help you move beyond individual projects into a genuine wholesale system for delivery of interoperable solutions into the future, as well as being able to engage with a whole community of innovators in a way that is standards. That way you're actually creating open ecosystems. And that's really important. You don't want to fall into the a risk of being considered a closed ecosystem. That's not a good mechanism. Being able to empower local citizens to create their own solutions, giving them the tools that they would need to have interoperable solutions into the future. That's actually a very strategic move. And creates a win-win between local economy and global solution providers as well. One such example that we explored was the notion of a smart inhaler. The reason we selected that was because the solution is quite simple, but it is actually quite complex when you get to the notion of moving from a traditional inhaler to, say, a connected inhaler. However, even though the ecosystem becomes much more complex when you get into the notion of a connected inhaler, it also creates the environment for new types of business models. And in the situation of the Smart Inhaler program that we worked on, we were able to model out new types of business models where citizens who traditionally had no access to an inhaler because of their socioeconomic background or just different regions obviously have different types of government support for the health service. And in some cases, people literally have no access to such important treatments. What we were able to explore was that you can create a whole ecosystem, and however, it requires designing the citizen at the center of that ecosystem, ensuring their privacy is adhered to, creating the governance for information management, as well as understanding how you can create new business models, because it still ultimately has to be paid for somewhere, somehow. And by designing an ecosystem model and through the connected inhaler, new types of business models could be explored in a very ethical and good way to give the citizens support that they need. We're also looking at creating new types of what we call catalyst proof of concept projects, where we could potentially collaborate between weather applications, communication service providers, and the health ecosystem to give more comprehensive alert warning systems, to enable more preventative care, and also to shift really the reaction of the citizen from something that is post-event to something that is pre-event. And that's an environment that we're exploring right now. So from Team Forum perspective, we have a global community. We're rooted in standards. We completely believe in them. We have set up our own architectures across the globe so that they are open and interoperable. They can be extended for the health scenario. Our members have the expertise as well as the infrastructure to act as genuine quality partnerships. And we look forward to the opportunity of collaborating with Artmedic in the future on new types of collaborative projects, and we can bring our ecosystems together. Thank you so much.
Excellent. That was a fantastic video. I must say that I learned a lot. Did not realize that there was a smart inhaler, so I'm looking forward to seeing what other developments there are. So our final panelist for today is Nicola Madden-Gregg, first Vice President of Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and she will be doing a presentation on the role of the hotel and tourism sector in engaging diverse audiences in climate action.
Good afternoon, everyone, and so happy to be here and joining you today. I hope you're seeing my presentation. Yes. The CHTA, the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, is definitely interested in this whole idea of climate change and impact it has on our industry. The CHTA is one of those organizations that has taken the whole role of climate change as part of our mandate and has implemented various methodologies to ensure that our members are in keeping and in step with this. But before we go into it, I'm just covering some of the areas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CHTA and our role, why the tourism industry is vested, why we think the downside of going it alone, and why collaboration and partnerships are critical to our success, and give you a little bit of our idea on the way forward. So the CHTA is an association of associations. So we have members of the various national hotel associations in 33 destinations in the Caribbean, representing 435 hotel members and over 200 allied company members. We have relationship with non-governmental organizations, tourist boards, and government entities throughout the region. And our membership extends to over 2,000 hotels and tourism service providers in the region. So our reach is quite wide. And so we pride ourselves in being able to touch every part of the Caribbean. Over the years, the CHTA has developed strong collaborative relationships with the Caribbean Tourism Organization, with CARICOM, the World Travel and Tourism Council, United Nations World Tourism Organization, American Resort Development Association, IADB, Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, CARFA, the Caribbean Council, IATA, FCCA, the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, and the Nature Conservancy. Yes, it's a mouthful, but these relationships and these collaborative partnerships have been critical to the success of Caribbean tourism. And I'm going to share with you exactly why these relationships are critical. Tourism represents one of the major drivers for the Caribbean. It's 1.9% of the GDP growth we have seen, 3.4% for travel and tourism GDP growth, and it provides 2.8 million jobs are supported by travel and tourism. So it's very important to the region. Many countries depend on tourism for the majority of their income earning and their jobs. So for the CHTA, it is important that we focus here. We've had, up before COVID, over 30 million stopover arrivals to the region. And we have had over 30,000 new hotel rooms that were in construction and planning stages as we started 2020. Obviously, with COVID, a lot of these projects and outgrowth of the industry has been stymied, but we were on a very good upward trajectory and had experienced a 3.5% growth in 2019, outpacing the global economy growth of 2.5% for the 9th consecutive year. Tourism has an impact both indirectly and induced. We spread throughout many other industries, some of the main ones being manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, but it's reaching all sorts of nooks and crannies. And tourism is one of those industries that can drive other industries. As I said, it is the greatest driver for employment, economic activity, foreign exchange, and tax revenue. And because my time is limited, I won't go through the breakdown, but as you can see from this slide, if you take a quick look, it definitely is one of those factors that we continues to pay attention to. So why are we vested in climate change, and why is it important to us? For us, it is a social and economic imperative, but it is also a matter of business survival. Climate impacts the natural resources on which tourism is built. For the years preceding and to this day, we have continued to see receding coastlines. We have seen the impact of major hurricanes, which have shut down countries and in our industry time and time again. We have seen the buildup of sargassum, the Sahara dust storms, rising temperatures, and the list goes on. All of this stymies the industry and it stymies the economic viability of the Caribbean. There's also the changing and evolving dynamics of our travelers. Both business and leisure travelers are looking for sustainable destinations, and they're looking at these issues not only in just a very esoteric way, but they're putting it in contracts, they're putting it in their RFPs, they're asking hotels, attractions, what are you doing in terms of the climate imperative? Are you checking your water consumption, your energy consumption? How are you reducing? Are you doing recycling of plastics? They really want to know in depth detail as an organization, what it is you're doing to contribute to sustainable destinations. And so for the last few years, I would say up to 10 years, we have seen this increase more and more and more, and that's a good thing. We obviously feel that there is a downside of going it alone, and that's why partnership is key, and we continue to partner. We have partnered with various entities, as I said, both because we need resources. Resources generally are limited. We have to have staffing, we have volunteers, we have financial commitments to get major programs implemented across the region. There is also the silo mentality. If we are here in tourism doing this, while insurance is doing that, manufacturing is doing this, agriculture is doing that, we will never really get to where we need to be. And it's so important that all aspects, all industries are collaborating. As interested the previous presenter in terms of technology, and that is something that we really need to focus on, especially as we move into Industry 5.0 and see how we can utilize all the new technologies that are coming into the market to drive our sustainable practices and to ensure that we can respond to the challenges of climate change. With COVID, we as tourism had to use a lot of that technology to respond very quickly, to turn around practices that we used to take months, weeks, days to do, to get it down to hours, seconds. And because a lot of what was traditionally done would have been more touchy-feely, face-to-face. And COVID has forced many industries, including tourism, to utilize technology to really fast-track a lot of our processes and be more efficient. And so that, I think, is something that's important as we look to the challenges of climate change to see how we continue to implement technology to help us with the process. As we move along, as I said, we continue to collaborate and partnership, leveraging our resources, expertise, and influence. This includes advocacy efforts, research, getting shared knowledges, working on specific areas of focus, networking, and learning from best and worst practices. You have to recognize that we can learn from some of the mistakes of others so we don't repeat them ourselves, and that's very important. As I said, we do a lot of partnerships. For 7 years, we have had a partnership with CARFO, CHT, and CTO on health safety, and this was proven invaluable for the pandemic that we're going through. So much effort, time, we went through the SARS pandemic before, we had some development from then, and it was very good that those partnerships started back then because it was very easy for us to respond to the COVID pandemic, literally in lightning speed. We continue to build linkages. As we said, tourism has a lot of backward linkages into agriculture and manufacturing. And with climate change, those industries are also impacted, particularly agriculture. And so it also impacts our supplies in terms of goods and services, which means as the Caribbean, we would have to be, as Caribbean hoteliers, importing more, which is using up foreign exchange and having an impact on our economy. So the sustainable agriculture and manufacturing practices to ensure that our industries can also respond to climate change, ensuring that we have supply and that we can reduce linkages so that the tourism dollar stays in our economy is also something that's critical. And in Jamaica, we have our Tourism Linkages Council that has worked quite excessively on this kind of partnership, working with agriculture, manufacturing, and also the creative industries, but specifically for these purposes, those two are the ones that really stand out. We partnered with CTO IDB for our energy efficient program, which was rolled out specifically targeting also small and independent hotels who have major challenges, of course, in that area. And that has been a very successful project. We continue to work with OECS and CARICOM and CTO on tourism development and marketing. We work with OAS on crisis readiness, management, and response, both in terms of training, business retrofitting, and business recovery. Ravi's presentation on insurance was very, very insightful, because that's one of the things that we face, as he said, when a hurricane happens in one island, all of our premiums go up across the region. And so how do we manage costs? How do we become more efficient? How do we recover our businesses when one island is impacted? It seems as if it's the whole region. We do environmental protection and enhancement with the Nature Conservancy, and we also have worked with many partners like Green Globe, EarthCheck, and Responsible Travel, promoting to our members to get certification in these sustainable certificates. So what is the way?
Nicola,
Yes,
if we could
on the
ask you-
last slide.
Excellent, thank you.
The way forward, we have to understand the consequences of inaction. We need to build capacity, as we have through the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, continue to collaborate, agree on a common ground, and recognize the sense of urgency. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nicola, for that presentation. Particularly the slide that you had on the number of partnerships that you have developed over an extended period of time across the Caribbean. I think that that was very helpful, and I hope that it's something that can be discussed. And of course, excellent presentations to everyone, not just Nicola. But now is a good time for us to meet our discussants for today. And they are Dr. James Hospitalis, founder of Earthmedic, and Kevin Burrows, founder and chief investment officer of, and pardon me if I pronounce this incorrectly, is it Diomedia Capital Advisors Company Limited? But they're basically here to stimulate our discussion, get our brains thinking about the rationale for public-private people-planet partnerships and lessons to be learned from these partnerships. So now I hand you over to James and Kevin.
Kevin, you go ahead. You're the money man.
Oh, you want me to start? Okay. Welcome everyone, and thanks for having me here to kick off this discussion. So yeah, my background is more on the investment side. I am a investment manager investing in private equity, venture capital. I work with the University of the Bahamas on an existing PPP to build a student residence housing. So I guess what I would throw out to the panel, I think a key component of what everyone is talking about is needed is really the need for catalytic capital or blended finance providers who are driven by a strong impact first orientation and really a desire to tackle all of these the financing gaps that we're talking about, and particularly to solve these very large and intractable issues of climate change and the like. So I think these types of investors are very necessary in a lot of cases to get some of these investment projects off the ground, and by making concessions such as accepting perhaps a below market rate return relative to risk. But apart from that side, because like Ravi mentioned, by investing in these products, these projects, you don't have to give up return. But there are some people who are willing to accept a lower return. But also important is providing like guarantees for credit enhancement, first loss provisions, and the like. So I just kind of like to throw out to the panel, just what can we do to increase the scope of sort of this intentional capital that comes from foundations and family offices and the new SDG and ESG funds, and of course governments, to be able to provide this type of capital to fill some of this gap.
Is there anyone on the panel who would like to take that?
Perhaps I can give it a shot, Fiola. So my view on this is that it has to start. It's a chicken and egg, right? Because you have supply of capital and you have demand for capital.
Yeah.
And the reason you have demand for capital is usually because you have a market creating a commercial use for that capital, whatever the return is, whether it is at a normal rate of return or concessionary rate of return. So the issue becomes two things. How do you create the consciousness in our economical, in our commercial space for the appetite for business ventures that require that sort of capital? Because the worst thing you can have is capital seeking a use. You need to have a use calling on capital. So that's the first thing, and this, which is consciousness. And the second point is that if you look all across, certainly all across the Caribbean, okay, Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, you have a lot of institutional savings, right, that are relatively unproductive. The pool, there's excess liquidity, right? And often why is that? It's because the regulatory mechanisms to allow that capital to flow into anything that is not traditional and not deemed low risk based on the past is not acceptable. We do not take a forward enough look at what risk is in how the regulations allow capital to be allocated.
Okay, great. Is there anyone else on the panel who wants to weigh in on this? Oh, I think Kevin has a response.
No, I mean, I think, again, my background as a portfolio manager, we also need to recognize that there are real limitations embedded in a lot of institutional investment policy statements and institutional money. Many of those have not progressed to the point where they allow an explicit consideration of social and environmental returns in the investment decision-making process. Either they don't recognize these externalities, or if there is a trade-off between making those investments and returns, then you open yourself potentially up to liability if you make a decision based on non-traditional sort of risk and return, risk and return metrics. So I think institutionally there's an issue there as well. How do we evolve our investment policy statements to make more of an impact in the region?
Absolutely. I see that Nicola has her hand up.
Yes, I was just wanted to say that, yes, that is some of the challenge, and something we did in Jamaica a few years back, and I know a couple of the islands have a similar sort of program, is we developed a fund, the Tourism Enhancement Fund, and that is based on using a dollar figure from the tourist arrivals. I think we're at 20 US now, and for each stopover arrival, and we also have a dollar amount for cruise arrivals. And we've been able to use that fund to give low interest loans and grant funding for similar types of projects, whether it's development or sustainable projects. So it doesn't obviously bring the kind of money that is needed, but it is a stopgap. And that's something that we have used, especially even now through the COVID pandemic. We had developed a special vehicle to help persons retrofit and to respond to the pandemic, especially smaller entities, to be able to have their PPE and all of that. So, that's some consideration in terms of response. Maybe a special vehicle has to be created.
Okay, great. So I think
So-
James, you have a question.
No,
Yes.
this is really rich and fascinating. I have a specific question for the actuary, and I have a question for everybody. Ravi, you talked about possibility to have a societal benefit and commercial return. And everybody's talked about something that we need to work together. Public, private, and people. It's not the private sector by itself. It's not the government big stick by itself. So the first question to everyone is really, what are some of the lessons learned? And Nicola, I liked your slide that there are some not only best practices, but there's some worst practices. What have we learned that could be applied to this working together? Because we need to work better together than we ever have before, both locally in the region and making noise globally with the major polluters. And the question to Ravi as an actuary is, sometimes when I talk with insurance companies, I get the sense that they're just looking at the risk and trying to set the premium so they don't lose. The question doesn't seem to be asked, how do you bend the curve? How do you change the things upstream so that the risk is lessened and factor that into the modeling? If you take the issue of climate and the worst thing we're going to see with cardiovascular disease, asthma, and other such conditions, can the actuarial calculations look at what happens if you have some interventions that reduces obesity and have a healthier diet, that increases physical activity through alternative transport, so that you look at the bigger balance sheet and not just at the sort of narrow insurance view, but you look at broader co-benefits. And then I don't know how we have the dialogue about putting that into a bigger picture. So 2 questions, lessons learned on how we actually work together better. I feel very pleased when you're talking about the hotel and tourism program, hotel and healthy tourism. I had a hand in that some years ago. And the second question is on the actuarial side.
I'm not sure. Yes, Ravi, yes.
So yeah, perhaps I'll take the question, James, but specifically to me first. You know, it's a very interesting point. I'll answer by way of analogy because I think exactly what you're saying is very possible and something that the insurance industry has a responsibility to look at. Because we've done it before, okay? In health insurance, the trend used to be very reactive, okay? So a group makes health claims, say the loss is bad, okay, we raise premiums in next year, loss is good, we lower premiums in next year. But the new way of looking at health claims is to get ahead of the curve, okay? And when you go in and you provide health insurance, you provide wellness services. Because you know by impacting the wellness of the pool, they're going to pay less claims. So that's why I keep saying about win-win, right? Because people like getting wellness services because it's something that they get for free. And insurers win too because you end up paying less claims. But you're ahead of the curve. It also creates societal good because you actually create an environment where there's less disease. So who does not win in that scenario? And I think you're very right, James. We have to bring to bear the data and the different parts of society to see how financial insurers in particular, right, can make proactive conditions so that we address the issues about climate change effectively before it happens. Okay, to a certain extent, it's also done now in PNC, right? That a hotel is on the coast and you say, no, we can't cover it because we have experience with this and you need to do this. It's going to lower your risk from tidal surge and then we're good. We need to do the same thing at a carbon footprint level, okay? But it needs to be studied. It needs to be studied better. And I think it's pretty nascent into how it is addressed, not only in the Caribbean, but globally. But it's certainly a good point. And that's a good example of how we need to pool our data to create a cohesive solution.
I see that Gabriel has his camera on. I think you'd like to join the conversation.
Yes, thank you. You know, exactly what Ravi has said. More and more private sector across the region, and we have a regional Chamber of Commerce group in called CARICHAM, have been looking at mobilizing private resources to take action, because exactly what Ravi has said with wellness checks and building in, because in the old days, you could not go to the dentist or go to the doctor to get medical, a sort of health check on you. But now they're including it in insurance because they realize that by keeping you healthy, you benefit, that's the insurer, but the client benefits because he's paying lower rates. And the same applies. So what we can do is take climate change, both in the form of the carbon footprint impact, which requires a little more innovative thought, and health. But health is a lot easier to deal with because health has a sort of immediate payback. When I say immediate payback, by dealing with health today, you become healthier relatively soon if you do the right things. Whereas for the carbon footprint, the time frame for seeing the result, and that's why government needs to help a little bit to provide or to deal with the regulatory issues. So the point is well taken, James and Ravi. That's the true opportunity where it's private sector led, and we can do something without waiting for a government act.
Okay, great. So, James, was that your first and second, or that was the first question you had?
No, that was the first and second. I mean, if I had a follow-up, it would be, how do you overcome some of the reluctance, the fear that we have in the Caribbean to sharing data? Whether it's government, private sector, people don't like to share data. So any ideas on that?
After Ravi. Go ahead, Ravi.
You know, that's interesting. I do not understand why we in the Caribbean guard our data so closely. I really don't. I think we're making progress too, James. I think the mentality is changing. I mean, Gabriel would be familiar with a project that we're doing across the Trinidad insurance companies, where people have started to share their motor data for the common good, right? To help the police tag criminals, right? So it is starting to happen. And I think with the right conversations, we'll get a much better flow of data. The part of the realization is not so much the data you have here, it's what you do with the data. And I think as people start to understand data science a lot more, they come to that realization. It's not so much the data, but it's the models that you could create. So for instance, within our company, we're not that concerned about the data, but some of the ML and the AI models that we create, we might patent because we think the models are where the value is, not so much the data.
Correct. Yeah, so I think taking Ravi's point, I'd like to jump off on that. First thing we need to understand, the term data in its own means it's not as useful as information. So a lot of people capture data, but having a whole set of numbers and not understanding how you convert that into information and usable tools. What we have done at the chamber and at other chambers is we collate data on behalf of industry players. But that means there has to be trust. That means there has to be trust that we're going to, and we do this for the pharmaceutical sector, we do it for the alcohol sector, because no one wants to share what their share of the alcohol market is, or what their share of the insurance market is, or how much sugar they import, James. Right? So what happens is that the way we deal with that is we capture the data and we sterilize it, so we provide sectorial information across that. And I know the insurance industry of all, they probably have ATIC, which is the Trinidad entity, has a very strong cohesive operation that allows them to do that. So I think that's a positive move.
Just to wind up this bit then, so this is really important. Trust. Ravi said, it is beginning to move, but it needs to be studied and documented that you can have these win-win outcomes. And I think this is very much the sort of thing that the conference is aiming at. How do you get information to people who will then make a decision that moves us forward?
I do want to, I see Ravi has his camera on. Did you want to make an additional comment?
no,
Okay, great. I do
no.
want to bring Nicola into the conversation, and we have a question from someone in the audience. And the question is, how much has the tourism industry cooperated with governments and other industries on climate-friendly ecotourism initiatives?
I think there has been over the years increase in collaboration. Definitely, as I said, the recognition of the importance. The market is also driving that. I can tell you 30 years ago when I came into the industry, that was when a lot of tourism entities start to focus on Green Globe certification and greening their organization. So the whole effort of mainstreaming ecotourism, the current travelers are looking for those kind of unique experiences. They want to be immersed in community and they want to be immersed in a natural environment. And I think coming out of COVID, that's going to become even more important. So I believe that collaboration will only get better. We've had projects in the past, but definitely we can improve and continue to strive in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, if I could chime in for the Bahamas, clearly, tourism is a major sector of our economy. 65% of our GDP is probably tied to tourism in some way. So there's very close cooperation between our government and the tourism product. Bahamas, luckily, is an archipelago of 700 islands. So kind of post-COVID, we've really transitioned to the kind of play up what we call our family islands, the out islands, besides just Nassau, and really focus on low density resorts, eco-tourism, off the grid type of living. And we think that, again, that's a very positive change. We do have the mega resorts of Atlantis and Baha Ma that here in Nassau. But yeah, this COVID pandemic has kind of been the push I think all of us needed to focus on a different type of tourism product.
And it's diversification that's going to be key. You will always have that traveler who will want that mega all-inclusive experience. But I think as we go forward, we're finding, people want diverse experiences. The villa market took off through the pandemic. So people are coming outside of their typical comfort zones and are exploring other options. So I think we will see more travel and more travel being diversified across different types of accommodations where people want to experience, varied things and may come to the same destination time and time again and do different types of experiences. And that's a plus for the Caribbean. So if we can, in our various destinations, offer those various types of experiences, then you have that repeat guest who is coming time and time again for different experiences across the destination. So that's critical, yes.
There is another question, and I think this one is for Ravi. Does the insurance industry in Trinidad and Tobago offer insurance for the risk of any extreme events, such as flood coverages? Are there any case studies or examples of other insurance can follow? And they've particularly identified that they are not referring to the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility.
Sure. So very good question. The short answer is yes, because I think I know the question alludes to insurance besides the normal catastrophe insurance, right? Because everyone knows if you insure your house, you're going to get covered from the extreme events of hurricanes, earthquakes, that sort of thing. But I don't think that's what the question is alluding to, because there's a gap in the market, I think, at more a micro level, okay? And so you're going to see, and I'll explain what I mean, but by that, and you're going to see an evolution of insurance products that's imminent. You're going to start to see them coming out in 2022 that addresses that gap in the market. So for instance, what is that gap? I'm a farmer. I'm exposed to my crops being destroyed from floods. What do I do? Okay, the traditional types of extreme event coverage isn't good for that. because it's too expensive for an assessor to go and do an assessment and then determine that you need to make a payment. It's going to take too long for it to be effective. And also it doesn't really cater for policies of that small size. So what you're going to see happening is a lot more micro insurance, bespoke insurance for that sort of thing. But the triggers are going to be what's called in the insurance industry parametric triggers. So for instance, you are a farmer, and I'm sorry, I have to use a Trinidad example, in Aranjuez. That's where a lot of farming happens in Trinidad. So what you cover is if the nearest weather station, as long as the nearest weather station detects more than 5 inches of rain, for example, a payout is instantly made, and we are going to set it up electronically, so the payment gets electronically transferred to you like that. There's no step in between. There's no filing of claim and all of that. And that is where I think a lot of gap is for extreme events. And yeah, there are case studies. I mean, so for instance, in England, for instance, the market vendors, they buy that sort of coverage because when they go out to sell in the market and it rains, they lose an entire day of revenue. So they use coverages like this to compensate them for the loss of the revenue that when these events happen. So I it's going to be an interesting era for products.
Apologies, just realized I was muted. There is another question. Could one of the answers be a consortium of private sector players who prioritize the solutions with guidance from the technical experts and set an action plan with deadlines and a budget? This is perhaps oversimplified, but we need to act now. Any thoughts, comments? I mean, here we're talking about a consortium of private sector players, and I see, Gabriel and the TNC Chamber of Industry and Commerce. So I know you have a large number of players right there.
What we are seeing happening is that many of the, as Ravi said, part of the challenges you have is in Trinidad especially, there's this bank of capital that's sitting there that's really not being optimized, and there has to be an opportunity regionally. We've been looking at how we maximize the CSME and how we can really mobilize that capital. So I know private sector, there are certain private sector leaders that are taking, if you want to take it, a much more holistic perspective on how they invest capital. And I think more and more as we come together and younger leaders are getting into the roles, they have a longer term vision. And you have to understand, a lot of companies that you are talking about, a lot of businesses you're talking about, trade on a stock exchange, they track their investment on a quarterly basis. What's my return? But as we get younger leaders in the marketplace, and as we look at how we can mobilize this capital to generate, right now it's getting no return. Most of that capital is sitting in a bank generating no return. So if we can find people who have the impetus to look forward, right, to look digitally forward, or to look, socially forward, I think you will see that happening. I don't know, Ravi and them are probably a good example about an organization that is rooted in the Caribbean that has a very long-term vision. So it'll be interesting to hear how you think about it, Ravi.
Yeah. I come back to my point that I don't think it's effective to force anything on a population. So, I'll explain what I mean by that. I think the world has drifted into a direction where we're constantly fighting ideological holy wars all the time. Okay, on intellectual issues, not on religious issues. And what I mean by that is we get bogged down in these entrenched positions. So if Gabriel happens to disagree with me on a particular point, that doesn't make him my enemy, because usually to get things done, you have to look for what you have in common, not what you have that makes you different. And you see, and often the people are the biggest culprits in this are actually people with the most information, the people who actually have the most information. But it ends up being polarized between them and people who have little information. So where I'm going with this is I don't believe that the average man in the Caribbean has climate change as part of his day-to-day consciousness. And we have to start by accepting reality, right? That's a fact. We can't pretend that it's otherwise. So we need to cause that consciousness to evolve, right? Because where we want to get to is that man makes a commercial decision based on the carbon footprint of this person who's at the other side of the transaction. That's where we want him to get to. But he's not there, and we can't drag him there. And the thing is, how do we get to that? We have start by things. What do people have in common? So the guy on a bus in Kingston may not be interested in climate change, but they might remember an era when their world was a lot greener, right? So I remember when I was a child, Portsmouth was a beautiful green city, and then everyone decided to cut down their trees and concrete their yards, right? So you start to plant into the consciousness that let's make the world greener, and then consciousness evolves, and consciousness evolves exponentially. So people start thinking about trees, then they start thinking about carbon, then they start thinking about pollution, and suddenly you have a population that wants all these things. And then once there's the demand, capital flows into it. And yes, I believe providers of capital have a responsibility to make sure it happens and pump it there. Even when it is a marginal business case, we have that responsibility. But even before that, we have a responsibility in how we choose to direct our CSR. Because corporate social responsibility is meant to do, what it's meant to do is corporations triggering a change in societal behavior for the greater good of society. So I think we need to see a lot more CSR directed in measures that will change the consciousness of society around this important issue of climate change.
Just to tap in on that, Ravi, that's what I mentioned early in my presentation, and we're seeing that in tourism. When we get corporate companies sending in RFPs for their business travel and for their other types of travel, it now comes as a part of that RFP document. They ask you those questions.
Yes.
And and if this is going to determine whether or not business comes to your property. So tourism has been seeing that, and our tour operators have been pushing now on the leisure side as well. So it has been part of the tourism DNA to move in that direction, because as you said, once the demand is there, once the customer is demanding it, or the individual citizen is demanding it, then the business will respond. But it's important, as you pointed out, that everyone puts this a part of their CSR, and then it will also continue to perpetuate. And on your end, you can make it trickle down to your suppliers. So if we on the front end are being faced with that, on the back end, we can turn around to our suppliers and say, well, what are you doing to contribute as well?
My son, who is a professor of artificial intelligence, sent me a little program this morning. Basically, it's an artificial intelligence program that take a picture of your house, and then it combines it with forecast maps for sea level rises and floods, and it shows you what your house is going to look like when it's flooded. And that changes people's minds right away in terms, because nobody wants to be flooded. Just like you may want to see a green city, you don't want to be flooded. And it changes how people perceive things if they can get an idea of what it's going to look like affecting them, their house.
So, I mean, say from a marketing perspective, there are two ways you can get people to act. One is, yes, highlighting the negative, the negative response through fear. And yes, if you see the flooded house, you will take action otherwise. The other way is the kind of carrot on a stick, which is what Ravi was suggesting in terms of talking about the memories of how green Port of Spain was, and trying to get people to go back into that mode or desire that. One thing that I think came out from Nicola was that, and it's something in my reading up for this panel, it's that when the stakeholders of the organizations start to demand, that the organizations pay more attention to climate change, that's when they pay more attention. But on their own, they would not. So if the clients are asking for it, or if the employees are asking for it, or if the wider community in which the organization operates is asking for it, then they will start to put things in place in terms of governance and in terms of decision making, to add this as one of the areas or one of the KPIs that they measure themselves on. And I thought that was a very interesting point where you mentioned that for Jamaica, you're getting a lot of RFPs that are requiring you to indicate that you have things in place in terms of climate change, or that you have sustainable practices in place at the locations that you have. Are there any ideas that you all might have in terms of, I know that Nicola would have had a list of partnerships that had been created. Are there any partnerships that you all can think of across the region? Because we could look at it at a national level, but I do believe in strength in numbers. Across the region that we can do between national governments, and that's a different story, right? So, but national governments and also private sector organizations, particularly the larger ones that I believe do have to lead the way for the smaller ones to come on board.
Should I go?
Yes, if you'd like to. I mean, so you seem to have some experience in building these partnerships.
Yes, it has been our success. I will tell you that from the Caribbean Hotel and Tourist Association point of view. Maybe because we have 33 destinations that we have to touch and feel. So working with CTO, working with IDB, working with ACS, working with Carrefour, you know, these various partnerships, both Nature Conservancy, which has been a great partner over the years. We have done many projects. Sometimes we start as a pilot in 2 or 3 destinations, and then we use that pilot to roll out the best practices and eliminate the worst practices across other islands. So we have found that strength in numbers is critical, because funding is short in supply, manpower is short in supply, and focus. You know, everybody has different things that they're trying to prioritize. And when you have, you know, instead of one of you, 5 or 6 of you pulling in the right direction, you find that things happen much faster and much easier. So definitely to look at how we can maximize on those partnerships and maybe create new ones and bring others into the fold. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just tourism on its own. We have to think about the linkages side of things and how do we work with other industries. And every industry should be looking at that to see how you partner with other industries that would impact your own efforts, because, you know, you can go out there as one industry, but, you know, the other industries that surround and in your ecosystem are going in a totally different direction. So yes, I agree. Partnership is key.
So we do have a question, and this may end up being the last question. What is the potential for private investment in climate change and health research, which has indirect financial returns for society in the long term, but no returns for the investor in the short term?
I think it depends on how short that short term is, right? I mean, you know, if you're talking private investment, and I spoke earlier about catalytic capital, whose goal really is to, you know, perhaps accept the below market return relative to their risk, at least over a short period of time. I mean, if we are talking private capital, ultimately, you know, there is an expectation of a return, unless we're talking about philanthropy, which is something different altogether. But there are, you know, there are foundations, family offices out there that might have a very long time frame to be able to measure their impact and generate a positive social and environmental return, as well as a financial return. So I think it's a nuanced question, but it is that blended finance catalytic capital model to be able to provide those types of funding.
I know, for example, in Jamaica, I really need to confirm it if it's actually launched as yet, but we have been announced to do a social stock exchange. And I know that's something that has been done on other stock exchange and in other territories. So maybe that's, you know, a way to look at it as well. if there are persons interested to put their capital into social investments and projects along those lines, companies that are geared towards climate change, that may be a tool, a vehicle that could be explored further.
It is difficult though. It is difficult, I will tell you. And that's why government, by providing some sort of framework that allows businesses to make that investment, cognizant that there is going to be a longer term payback. I think, you know, a lot of Caribbean entrepreneurs have a term they use called patient capital. I know a number of businesses in the region, they use the term patient capital because they're akin to the country. I mean, you know, especially in tourism sector, they look at building a product over a period of time. It's not easy. And I think my disappointment is I don't think regional governments have taken the leadership role they should take to provide an environment that allows people to look at investment with a longer term payback. That's my thought. I don't know.
Well, Gabriel, you know, I want to build on that point, okay, about the opportunity for regional governments to get involved and create the catalysts for some of these things. Because we tend to look at, often in the Caribbean, I think we go to the complicated solutions first and we don't start with these simple things. But there's I think there's some very simple things that regional governments could do that would cause private capital or private sector capital to be more amenable to channel itself into things like that. So for instance, if you're listed on a regional stock exchange by agreement of all the regional stock exchanges, that you must publish in your annual report your carbon footprint, right? It creates consciousness, it puts pressure on businesses to actively do something. For instance, that's on the corporate side. On the individual side, you know, you're busy, you're doing things, you're implementing property tax. Well, okay, fine. You get a discount if you have X amount of trees on your property, higher than a certain height, wider than a certain thing. You get it into the consciousness, right? Because you see, you have to create supply and demand at the same time. And these little things that I think the governments could do are act as a catalyst for it.
Yeah, but if I could, taking that point, if the government is talking about an in Trinidad mobilizing natural gas for export and wanting to reduce energy costs, why not create an incentive to make homes? And I keep on going back to what James told me, 7 years payback to put solar in his home. Why doesn't the government say, if you make this investment, we're going to help you because it's an investment to the ultimate benefit of the country. But I mean, you know, we had an incentive for electric vehicles, and this is where the budget doesn't fit into the strategy. Last year, the government decided that we're removing that. This year, they put it back in, and that's the disconnect between strategy and bookkeeping. I'm sorry to say. You're muted, Phil.
Yeah. So we do have 2 minutes left. I don't know if the discussants have any other questions or comments, or if the panelists would like to make any final comments before we wrap up.
I think this has been a
Closing
great
thoughts.
session. Talk about ESU and how we find win-win, and I found participants very open and not narrow at all, and recognizing you need to work together across businesses and between business and government. So I'm quite encouraged.
Any other closing thoughts or comments?
Well, we live on rocks here in the Caribbean, and if we don't take the impact of climate change on us is amplified because of the size of the rocks we live on. And if we don't take care of our rocks or the rocks around us, we're going to see what's happening. So we need to take any point. We need to start thinking longer term. And I see that happening with some private sector businesses, and I hope we see it wider.
And I think communication and collaboration is key, because we need to find venues to bring stakeholders together. So, you know, I commend like a conference like this, and we really need a lot more dialogue, ongoing dialogue, to make an impact.
Possibly, as you said, for that, we probably need some sort of a resource center or a focus area where people can get information, can look at projects to collaborate, some sort of centralized center that focuses on it. Of course, you know, we have the Global Tourism Resilience Center that is based in Jamaica, but that's one that has just started out, but that's specific to tourism, but something that maybe is more generic to Caribbean businesses and Caribbean countries and destination success at a higher level would be an important step forward.
Okay, great. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to our discussants. Thank you to those joining us online. It has been a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. No, hold on.